Hey, hello, my name is Miriam, and I'm going to present today my PowerPoint about arsenic and water contamination. So in the second slide, you will see later my YouTube video link. Here, for the icebreaker, guess what we will play today? It's about hopscotch. So it's actually a hop to it, and it's played the same way as the classic hopscotch, except that you replace the numbers in the hopscotch grid with words, and the more the kid play, the more words they will read and learn. And so how to play this game? First, they start by like drawing the hopscotch grid with chalk, and instead of number, they will fill the hopscotch box with words that are related to water. For example, it can be anything. A rain, swimming pool, ocean, river, anything related to water. And then the student will toss a stone into a box and then hop to and from it. And whenever the kid hops on a word, he or she read it out loud. And also to make the game more interesting, they can erase and change the words after the student successfully read it. So for my next slide, I'm going to present a little introduction overview about arsenic. So arsenic is a natural compound of the Earth's crust, and it is widely distributed through the environment in the air, water, and land. And also, arsenic is highly toxic, and toxic chemicals prevent or affect processes that are required for life. They somehow stop or change a function that is required for the animal, person, or plant to live. And it is a very potent toxin. And so what is this talk about drinking water? Well, in addition to being a poison, arsenic is a natural part of the Earth's crust, which means that it's a part of soil and rocks. And under some conditions, arsenic is released from the soil into the air. And usually the highest concentration is found in the groundwater. We will see later what does mean a groundwater. And so the well water is likely to have higher concentrations of arsenic than river water. Now that we learned what is arsenic, we're going to learn about where does arsenic come from. So arsenic is going to come from the rock or soil, though some kind of minerals have much higher concentrations of arsenic, such as arsenolite, and watering of these minerals will result in some arsenic getting into the air and water. And also, arsenic can come from volcano activity, because volcano activities, they can release large amounts of arsenic to the environment. And every year, natural resources contributes about 1/3 to the total annual release of arsenic to the atmosphere. And most of this comes from volcanoes. And also, arsenic can come from groundwater. Groundwater in contact with rocks that are high in arsenic, they can have high concentrations of arsenic, and this is a natural source of arsenic. And a lot of world's most troublesome problems posed are due to naturally high in arsenic in groundwater. And also we can find it in the oceans. Some animals and plants, they make organic arsenic compounds, and these can become very concentrated in an organism, but they are generally low in toxicity, even though they contain arsenic. In this slide, we're going to learn about how does arsenic get into the water. So in some cases, the arsenic in the water come from human activities, such as mining or processing metals. And sometimes it can come from the usage of arsenic on farms, like animal feed and wood preservative and pesticide. Okay, I'm going to explain this more. So, for example, in mining, a rock that does not contain useful quantity of the target metals is sometimes left in a pile, and it's just a rock, right? Well, this material, it was never actually exposed to air when it was buried in the earth, and once it was exposed, it can react with oxygen, with or without the help of bacteria, and it makes it release metals and arsenic to the water. And in farms, some chemicals are used, such as pesticides. They're used on farm fields to kill weeds and insects, and to fertilize the plants. And when the rain comes, these chemicals get washed into the ground and eventually into the water. But more of these problems is with groundwater. Okay, first, let me ask you this question. Think about this. Have you ever dug a hole in sand next to an ocean or lake? What happened? And as you're digging, you're reaching that water. So that's groundwater. And so the reason I said the problem is with groundwater is because it's harder to detect and avoid because of the concentrations found there. And arsenic, it can't be seen, smelled, or tasted, and there is not always an obvious source. So here in this slide, we will learn about some sources of groundwater contamination. And so groundwater contamination can happen when man-made products such as gasoline, oil, road salts, and chemicals get into the groundwater, and it causes it to become unsafe for people to use. And so one of the sources is the storage tanks. They can contain oil, chemicals, and other types of liquids, and they can either be above or below ground. And over time, the tanks can corrode and crack and also develop leaks. And if the contaminants leak out and get into the groundwater, there can happen some serious contaminations that can occur. And so another source are the septic systems. So basically, those are used by homes, offices, or other buildings that are not connected to a city sewer system. And so septic systems, they are actually designed to slowly drain away human waste underground, a slow and harmless rate. The third source of groundwater are hazardous waste sites. Those, they can lead to groundwater contamination if there are barrels or other containers that are laying around that are full of hazardous materials. And then the other source of groundwater contamination are landfills. So landfills, they are the places that our garbage is taken to be buried. And so landfills, they are supposed to have a protective bottom layer to prevent contamination from getting into the water. But if there is no layer or it is cracked, contaminants from the landfill, they can make their way down into the groundwater. And then there is the widespread use of road salts and chemicals, which is another source of groundwater contamination. And so those road salts, they are used during winter to put melt ice on roads to keep cars from sliding around. And so when the ice melts, the salt gets washed off the roads and eventually end up in the water. Okay, so now that we have learned about groundwater, we also hear surface water. So what's really the difference between surface water and groundwater? So to go back to arsenic, when the source of arsenic in the bedrock and soil material, surface water doesn't really stay in contact with the source of the arsenic for long enough to dissolve much of it. And in the concentration, it stays low. But the exceptions to this rule would be if an industry that uses arsenic release wastewater to a river. And so on the other hand, for groundwater, it stays in contact with bedrock or soil material for decades or even centuries. And that allows it to accumulate a much higher concentration of arsenic if it is present in the rock. So that's why arsenic are usually higher in groundwater than surface water. But why does arsenic get into the groundwater? Okay, that's a good question. To understand why arsenic gets into the groundwater, we need to understand first where it comes from. And so let's take a look at the water cycle. So this picture that I have here below, it shows how the hydrologic cycle works. It starts in the ocean when energy from the sun causes water to evaporate. And so in the atmosphere, it condenses in form of clouds. And the clouds move with prevailing winds until the drop size get too big and the drops are too heavy to stay in the atmosphere, which cause rain. And if the cloud is over the ocean, when that happens, the water will just cycle again. And if it is over land, it will contribute to land-based hydrologic cycle, as like we can see here in the picture. And so the rainwater runs over the surfaces into rivers and lakes and eventually back to the ocean, or it travels through the soil to the groundwater and flows underground, and again, ultimately it ends back in the ocean. And so here in this slide, we will talk about some interesting key facts and data statistics. So arsenic, it appears in two forms, organic form and inorganic form. Inorganic form is the form which is the most toxic. And also arsenic, we cannot smell it or taste it. And it's usually a colorless powder that do not evaporate. And also, there is an estimate of 140 million people in at least 70 countries have been drinking water containing arsenic at levels above the WHO provisional guidelines value of 10 microgram per liter. And this is consistent with recent statistical modeling, which says that 94 and 220 million people are at risk of exposure to elevated arsenic concentrations in the groundwater. So now let's talk about some symptoms, causes, and treatments. So the symptoms of arsenic poisoning, they can be acute or severe and immediate or chronic, where damage to health is mostly experienced over a long period of time. And so it will often depend also on the method of exposure. So when a person who has swallowed arsenic, they can show signs and symptoms within 30 minutes. They can experience some headaches, confusions, severe diarrhea, etc. And regarding some disease, arsenic it can cause many diseases for long-term exposure from drinking contaminated water or food. It can cause lung cancer, skin lesions, cardiovascular disease, or diabetes. It is also there is an association between chronic arsenic exposure and cancer, which is strongest, especially for skin, lung, and bladder cancer. Regarding the treatment, there are some methods to remove arsenic from the human body, and that consists in having blood transfusion, taking mineral supplements that lower the risk of potential fatal heart rhythm problems, washing the affected skin area, and even using some heart medications in case the heart starts failing. Let's talk about some preventions and call to action. There are two primary preventions and two secondary preventions. The first primary prevention consists in removing arsenic removal systems in home, and so those systems they can be purchased from for the home to treat drinking water and reduce the arsenic level. Also, there is a short-term solution until the arsenic contamination it can be dealt with at the source. The second primary intervention it would be to test water sources for traces of arsenic, and for example examining the water can help to identify poisonous sources for arsenic. The second prevention consists in taking care when harvesting rainwater. So in areas of high rainfall, arsenic poisoning can be prevented by ensuring the process of collection. It does not put the water at risk of infection or cause the water to become like a breeding ground for mosquitoes. And so the last prevention is consists in considering the depth of wells. Like the deeper the well, the less arsenic the water is likely to have. Then for our call to action, we have two. The first one is stimulate arsenic remediation, and it can be done by developing some strategies to circumvent and avoid the impacts of arsenic ground contamination. And the second call of action, it consists of eliminating human health threats, and that can be done by expanding the database of groundwater quality and quantity in some regions. So the next slide, here is my infograph, and it has an overview of the health topic, the causes and the implications, the key facts, data and statistics, and call to action, which we talked about earlier. Here is the assessment quiz. If you go through this link, you can have access to it and take this quiz. And then let's do a wrap up. So we learned from previous slides that arsenic is a health hazard, and drinking water with high level of arsenic can cause many health issues, such as cardiovascular problems or some types of cancers. And also, we learned that arsenic, it can be reduced or removed entirely from drinking water through some treatment techniques. But treatment process, it requires careful maintenance and monitoring. If treatment is not possible in the system, then you should consider developing a different water source or connecting to another safe water source in the area. And that's the evaluation overview link. If you click on this link, you will be able to have access to it and complete the form. And those are my references. And thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any comments or concerns, don't hesitate to contact me. Here is my email address. And thank you so much again for watching.